Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Callahan, and today I'm representing the Board of Trustees for this Springfield, Vermont Unitarian Universalist Church. Today is April 23rd, 2023, and our service is featuring the Reverend Nancy Crumbine. We're experiencing some quintessential April showers today, and it seems as though everything is just turned green overnight. It's beautiful. We have some time at the end of the service to make announcements and to introduce any guests. If you care to, you can introduce yourself or not. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we hope that you stay for our coffee hour here at the meeting house, or if you're online, we have a chat on Zoom. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. You know, listening to that wonderful bell, I realize the upper room probably can't hear it. It goes on for quite a while. And those of us here can hear it on various levels, of course. Sometimes days I worry that each Sunday I'm here, I hear it a little less. Please join me in worship this morning. Blessed, mud luscious springtime in Vermont. We are standing and applauding you in all your glory. April, in all your madness, we welcome you with joy and thanksgiving, with all your contradictions, with all our love. And I wanted to start this morning with a Rumi poem as part of the opening words. Some translators have called it the wagon. I don't get that. I'm just going to read it. Sorry, I even said that. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. All right, the story for all ages is the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, retold by Ursula Le Guin. I'm not going to read her whole piece that appeared in the New Yorker many years ago and was given to me as one of the greatest gifts I've ever received from a colleague of mine, my dear colleague, Priscilla Sears at Dartmouth. And I read it every chance I get. And I thought I could read it again today, but I'll just tell you the story. You remember Adam had the power of naming. God gave him the power of naming. And in those old days, naming was considered a really powerful act. Of course, it still is today. When we put a name on something or somebody, very powerful. But Adam had the power to name, and he named all the animals and the flora and fauna of the Garden of Eden. And Le Guin imagines Eve being kind of fed up with Adam, not appreciating how he went about the naming. And so she imagines Eve talking as she redoes a few things. And the pieces, so I'm going to read selected pieces, but it's called She Unnames Them. And I will interrupt if I think I need to explain a little bit more. Most of them, again, this is Ursula Le Guin, most of them accepted namelessness with the perfect indifference with which they had so long accepted and ignored their names. Are you with me? So she has already unnamed them. Whales and dolphins, seals and sea otters consented with particular grace and alacrity, sliding into anonymity as into their element. And then she goes on to talk about the yaks resisting, etc. And the cats, of course. A couple of problems did come up with pets. The cats, of course, steadfastly denied ever having had any other name than those self-given, unspoken, ineffably personal names, which, as the poet named Eliot said, they spend long hours daily contemplating. The insects parted with their names in vast clouds of swarms of ephemeral syllables, buzzing and stinging and humming and flitting and crawling and tunneling away. As for the fish of the sea, their names dispersed from them in silence throughout the oceans like faint, dark blurs of cuttlefish ink, and drifted off on the currents without a trace. None were left now to unname. And yet how close I felt to them when I saw one of them swim or fly or trot or crawl across my way or over my skin, or stalk me in the night, or go along beside me for a while in the day. They seemed far closer than when their names had stood between myself and them like a clear barrier. So close that my fear of them and their fear of me became one same fear, and the attraction that many of us felt, the desire to smell one another's smells, feel or rub or caress one another's scale or skin or feathers or fur, taste one another's blood or flesh, keep one another warm, that attraction was now all one with the fear. And the hunter could not be told from the hunted, nor the eater from the food. This was more or less the effect I had been after. It was somewhat more powerful than I had anticipated, but I could not now, in all conscience, make an exception for myself. I resolutely put anxiety away, went to Adam and said, "You and your father lent me this, gave it to me actually. It's been really useful, but it doesn't exactly seem to fit very well lately. But thanks very much. It's really been very useful." So she gives her name back as well. It's hard to give back a gift without sounding peevish or ungrateful, and I did not want to leave him with that impression of me. He was not paying much attention as it happened and said only, "Put it down over there, okay?" And went on with what he was doing. One of my reasons for doing what I did was that talk was getting us nowhere. But all the same, I felt a little let down. I had been prepared to defend my decision, and I thought that perhaps when he did notice, he might be upset and want to talk. I put some things away and fiddled around a little, but he continued to do what he was doing and to take no notice of anything else. Adam doesn't come across very well in this piece. It's a little stereotype. At last I said, "Well, goodbye, dear. I hope the garden key turns up." He was fitting parts together and said without looking around, "Okay, fine, dear. When's dinner?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm going now with the," I hesitated and finally said, "with them, you know," and went on out. In fact, I had only just then realized how hard it would have been to explain myself. I could not chatter away as I used to, taking it all for granted. My words now must be as slow, as new, as single, as tentative as the steps I took going down the path away from the house. Between the dark branched, tall dancers motionless against the winter shining. Now we have the affirmation.
Yes, now we have the affirmation. Please join me in saying our affirmation once it comes up. Here we go. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve the need of all beings, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with the source of our being. Thank you. The offering will occur now. Thank you.
I'm glad to have Tina Wood with us this morning as well on the piano. Well, okay, some readings. Wow. I have some April poems for us. And I'll start, of course, with Edna St. Vincent's Millay's famous cynical April poem called Spring. To what purpose, April, do you return again? Beauty is not enough. You can no longer quiet me with the redness of little leaves opening stickily. I know what I know. The sun is hot on my neck as I observe the spikes of the crocus. The smell of the earth is good. It is apparent that there is no death, but what does that signify? Not only underground are the brains of men eaten by maggots, life in itself is nothing. An empty cup, a flight of uncarpeted stairs. It is not enough that yearly down this hill, April comes like an idiot, babbling and strewing flowers. Edith Franklin Wyatt, April weather. If you could have a perfect day to dream of when your life were done, would you choose one all clear, all gay? If you could have a perfect day, the airs above the wide green way, sheer virgin blue with crystal sun? If you could have a perfect day to dream of when your life were done. Or would you have it April's way? Haphazard rain, haphazard sun, divine and sordid, clear and gray, dyed like these hours, own work and play, all shot with stains of tears and clay. Haphazard pain, haphazard fun. If you could have a perfect day to dream of when your life were done. and Denise Levertov, Making Peace. A voice from the dark called out, quote, "The poets must give us imagination of peace to oust the intense familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war," unquote. But peace, like a poem, is not there ahead of itself, can't be imagined before it is made, can't be known except in the words of its making. Grammar of justice, syntax of mutual aid, a feeling towards it, dimly sensing a rhythm. It's all we have until we begin to utter its metaphors, learning them as we speak. A line of peace might appear if we restructured the sentence our lives are making, revoked its reaffirmation of profit and power, questioned our needs, allowed long pauses. A cadence of peace might balance its weight on that different fulcrum. Peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza, into the world. Each act of living one of its words, each word a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal. And just for fun, one last reading from my book. The daffodils have returned. How is it possible to comprehend or say out loud? How can we go about our business as if nothing extraordinary has happened? And yet to really take it in, how then can we proceed? The daffodils have returned. The fullness of spring prompts me at times to want to curl up in a dark corner of a damp cellar, or have a beer in a grungy bar at midday. Life is too much to comprehend, the beauty too much to bear. I am daring that many of us have such moments, not wanting to love one more thing, not being able to bear the thought of so much life so freely given, the colors too bright, the bird songs too dear, the debt for being alive too great, the dread of dying too alive. Like the love of our children, so beautiful and poignant to us, we can barely look at them but at a glance. The openness to the creation is a task only a very few can bear to sustain. Mostly we avoid the miracle in subtle ways, keeping busy, doing things, turning our attention every which way, but to the being of our existence. Every April, I ask the daffodils to teach me once again how simply to stand still, bearing witness, being grateful, moving only as the wind suggests. Please join me in the spirit of meditation. Light of April, mist of morning, surround each of us with gratitude in your gentle embrace. Teach us to rise in trust and to work in faith, to know the joy of our finding home within the time and space of our forgetting, in the wisdom of your season. I just realized that the program said that I was going to do a reading from Kimmerer. But we'll get to that. I'm going to weave that in. I also there's so many readings that I wanted to do. One of them was a journal entry from Thoreau, April. I always, whatever the season, whatever the month, I look up everything he wrote in April in this wonderful collection by Jeffrey Kramer of selections from his journal. Of course, his journal is like 18 volumes long. Nobody has read them all, I don't think, except maybe Jeffrey Kramer. But it's a I won't read it because of time, but the passage is describing his afternoon when he sees a woodchuck and he slowly approaches it. And of course, no one had the patience and knowledge that Thoreau had, but he was able to sit still long enough to have a relationship with this woodchuck. It's really a beautiful passage. April 1852, you can look it up. April 16th. Well, it's Earth Day weekend. Happy Earth Day, happy Earth Month, happy Earth Year. Let's start with the paradox of listening to words, my words in this case this morning, that will tell you, which will try to say how inadequate words are. Here's a paradox. Listening to me, to someone pleading for us all to be silent. Confessing that writing about the need to be silent poses a bit of a conundrum, I confess it. This is the paradox of poetry at its core. That the source of all great poetry is silence. And is, I dare say, its goal. From silence, back to silence. Humility, silence, humility, the divine task set out for humans. We were given the power of complex speech. I suggest this morning we must use it in the service of silence. This is the spiritual charge to which every traditional prayer speaks, or should. We venture forth with our weapon of words, but if we don't understand they are meant to help us settle into sitting silently with the woodchuck in the pasture, we have failed to understand their use. Language can help us to still our monkey brain into paying attention. When words can bring us into silence. Paying attention to the present, to nature, to the divine. Think Moses, the burning bush. Think Vermont's lilacs bursting, burning, calling us to save our people from words. And since our culture has itself become monkey-brained, saving our people means now freeing ourselves from the slavery of words and the plastics those words have created. I'm thinking of the opening of the great film, 1967 film, The Graduate. And there's a party going on in honor of Ben's graduation from college, and his parents have invited all the posh friends around the pool to celebrate. And Mr. McGuire, a friend of the father's, pulls Ben aside. Remember what he says? One word of advice for you, Ben. Just one word. And the word is plastics. Of course, his advice is prescient. The 50 plus years since that movie has been the age of plastics. No doubt about it. It has been the miracle of the consumer economy. The pinnacle of our verbal intelligence. And it is now, as well as being the source of fabulous medical invention, etc., it is now as well the poison that inhabits us all. Why am I bringing this up this morning when I promised you a sermon on listening? Imagine if Mr. McGuire had taken Ben aside and said one word of advice to him. And that it wasn't a noun that Mr. McGuire said to Ben, but a verb, such as listen. Listen to the earth, Ben. Imagine if our children across this country recited every morning, not the Pledge of Allegiance to a flag, to a nation, but recited every morning a thanksgiving, as do the children of the Onondaga tribe. And I'm going to read just a part of a very long recitation that these children speak every morning. We are thankful to our Mother Earth, for she gives us everything that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk about upon her. It gives us joy that she still continues to care for us, just as she has from the beginning of time. To our mother, we send thanksgiving, love, and respect. Now our minds are one. And it goes on to thank the wind and the animals and the plants, etc. Imagine our world where Thanksgiving was the center and the beginning of every day. Imagine a gift economy, what Kimmerer calls a gift economy. You all know this book that I'm referring to, Braiding Sweetgrass. I just do another advertisement for it. Hallie announced last time that Robin Kimmerer was going to be in Bellows Falls last week. It turned out a little bit of an exaggeration, but it turns out it was better she wasn't there because the discussion was fabulous around this book. And one of the things that was really hopeful to me was that I'm blanking on her name, the bookseller in Bellows Falls, Alan and, anyway, the fabulous bookstore in Bellows Falls, she sold 102 copies of this book. And she was one of the co-sponsors. They were one of the co-sponsors of the discussion. It's a must read for anyone. Imagine, so Kimmerer talks about in this chapter, and I can't go into it today, the difference between gift economy and consumer economy. And you can imagine what that difference is. Starts with Thanksgiving and gift giving and seeing all that the planet gives us as gifts that we need to share with each other and to nurture, as instead of consuming and exploiting. Imagine a world in which Eve was able to unname the animals and the plants, listening to what they wish to name themselves. This is no idle fantasy anymore. This is the necessity we face. As Mark O'Connell put it in his in the headlines of his New York Times article this morning, our way of life is poisoning us. But you all know this. So this morning I want to focus on nouns and Kimmerer's brilliant essay in Beyond Sweetgrass, The Grammar of Animacy. Because if we have a problem in the very language we use to understand the world, if we have a problem with our most powerful weapon, words, how we use them, that's something we can address. That's something we can learn to change. And to put it simply, Kimmer and many others suggest, and as did Le Guin in the piece that I read you, suggest that we have a very serious problem with nouns. That when we fall in love with our nouns, instead of being enlivened by our verbs, we alienate ourselves from the very web of existence which sustains us. 70% of humans on this planet speak English, one of the more problematic of languages for connecting with, what shall I call it, earth, with nature, with life, the source of being. The crisis of our day, of course, is human hubris, that most of us see our species as masters of the universe, namer of all things, fixer of all things, the smartest of all species, etc. We imagine ourselves to be Adam. We live in a commodity economy where the law itself says that corporations are people and have rights, but animals and plants do not. What? Corporations are legally people. Animals and plants have no legal rights. Although, of course, there are some exceptions happening in New Zealand. A river was given legal rights. In Ecuador, I believe there is movement. There is a worldwide effort now to correct this. But it's very slow moving, as you can imagine, and not getting anywhere in the United States at this point. We live in a world that Adam named and continues to name. So out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name, unquote. Then God pulls a woman out of Adam's rib and Adam names her as well. Naming, folks, has power. In ancient times, supernatural power. We don't know how long it took Adam to name all these animals or whether he consulted with them. The biblical text suggests there was no consulting and it was accomplished quickly. But we do know that Adam had dominion over it all. So what's wrong with nouns? They're static. They describe items in space, things, inanimate. It's. In English, of all the things named with nouns, only humans have personhood. Only humans have animacy. You are either a human in the English language, or you are a thing. All other things than humans, all other than humans are inanimate. A table and a plant are both its. Animals have gender, but until very, very recently were thought to have no intelligence and little emotion. Now I will read from Kimmer. When we tell them that the tree is not a who, but an it, we make that maple an object. We put a barrier between us, absolving ourselves of moral responsibility and opening the door to exploitation. Saying it makes a living land into natural resources. If a maple is an it, we can take up the chainsaw. If the maple is a her, we think twice. A student countered Andy's argument, but we can't say he or she, that would be anthropomorphism. Kimmer, They are well-schooled biologists who have been, Kimmer, by the way, I'm sorry, I should explain for those of you who don't know. She's a Western trained scientist, biologist, and a Native American wise woman. So this book is a combination of the two. It's extraordinary. She goes on there, and she's talking about her biology students. They are well-schooled biologists who have been instructed in no uncertain terms never to ascribe human characteristics to a study object, to another species. It's a cardinal sin that leads to a loss of objectivity. Carla pointed out that it's also disrespectful to the animals. We shouldn't project our perceptions onto them. Andy countered, but just because we don't think of them as humans doesn't mean they aren't beings. Isn't it even more disrespectful to assume that we're the only species that counts as persons? The arrogance of English is that the only way to be animate, to be worthy of respect and moral concern, is to be a human. Thomas Berry has written, we must say of the universe that it is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And I want to read another section here about, or just it's self-explanatory. Imagine seeing your grandmother standing at the stove in her apron and then saying of her, look, it is making soup. It has gray hair. We might snicker at such a mistake, but we also recoil from it. In English, we never refer to a member of our family, or indeed to any person, as it. That would be a profound act of disrespect. It robs a person of selfhood and kinship, reducing a person to a mere thing. So it is that in Potawatomi and most other indigenous languages, we use the same words to address the living world as we use for our family, because they are our family. I read years ago Martin Buber's book, I, Thou. Anyone else read it? Remember it years ago? Nobody talks about it anymore. He's a great Jewish theologian. And in his book, he talks about the primacy of relation, way before anyone was talking about it. That I-thou relationship. If you look for love, if you ask yourself, do I love my partner? If you look inside, you won't find it, because love isn't in each of us. It's in the in-between. It's in relation. Verbs help us remember relation. Verbs embody or describe movement or change. Verbs are alive and suggest what they describe is alive. Instead of tree, Le Guin writes at the end of that piece I read, quote, the dark branch, tall dancers motionless against the winter shining. Kimmer tells us that only 30% of English words are verbs, whereas in Potawatomi, her language, 70% of the words are verbs. I'll read another short passage in which she talks about a moment where she understood this. Talking about, I remember paging, which she didn't grow up learning Indigenous language. She learned it. She's been learning it as an adult. I remember paging through the Ojibwe dictionary, trying to decipher the tiles, but the spellings, pages blurred and my eyes settled on a word, a verb, of course, to be a Saturday. Phew, I thought. I threw down the book. Since when is Saturday a verb? Everyone knows it's a noun. I grabbed the dictionary and flipped more pages, and all kinds of things seemed to be verbs. To be a hill, to be red, to be a long sandy stretch of beach. And then my finger rested on and I can't pronounce this word, I'm sorry, Wikwegama, to be a bay. B-A-Y, as in body of water. Ridiculous, I ranted in my head. There is no reason to make it so complicated. No wonder no one speaks this language anymore. The cumbersome language impossible to learn. A bay is most definitely a cumbersome language impossible to learn, and more than that, it's all wrong. A bay is most definitely a person, place, or thing, a noun and not a verb. I was ready to give up. I'd learned a few words, none done by duty to the language that was taken from my grandfather. Oh, the ghosts of the missionaries in the boarding schools must have been rubbing their hands in glee at my frustration. She's going to surrender, they said. And then I swear I heard the zap of synapses firing. An electric current sizzled down my arm and through my finger and practically scorched the page where that one word lay. In that moment, I could smell the water of the bay, watch it rock against the shore, and hear it sift onto the sand. A bay is a noun only if water is dead. When bay is a noun, it is defined by humans, trapped between its shores and contained by the word. But the verb, wikwagama, to be a bay, releases the water from bondage and lets it live. To be a bay holds the wonder that for this moment, the living water has decided to shelter itself between these shores, conversing with cedar roots and the flock of baby mergansers. Because it could do otherwise, because a stream or an ocean or a waterfall, these are verbs for that too. To be a hill, to be a sandy beach, to be a Saturday, all are possible verbs in a world where everything is alive. Water, land, even a day, the language a mirror for seeing the animacy of the world. This is the language I hear in the woods. This is the language that lets us speak of what wells up around us. Verbs also allow us to listen and to be humble. It means giving rights to other species. A democracy of species. In a lovely interview, Kimmer answers the question, what to do with a piece of land that I just inherited? And she shines in her answer. She says, become indigenous to it. Re-inhabit it. Love it. Pay attention. Get to know every plant. Create relationship. Then ask the oak, what do you need to flourish? I want to tell one last story. It was freshman orientation week, and there was a room full of very nervous first week freshmen. And I was paired up with another faculty member to lead the students in a discussion of Virginia Woolf's great work, A Room of One's Own. The faculty member I was paired with began his introduction of the text by telling the students that Virginia Woolf was a lesbian. I wish I had a photograph of these freshman faces. This was, by the way, many years ago. But alas, I'm not sure it would have been that different today. The conversation was over before it began. The noun precluded their ability to see the genius of this great artist. Worse, they thought they had learned something about her. when in fact they had simply flooded their minds with the meaning of that word, stereotypes I can only shudder to imagine. And so, in fact, the noun closed the possibility of knowing anything about Wolf herself. Nouns are necessary, categories are necessary, but spiritually, we must always push against categories and nouns. We must always push for the verbs, for the energy within and between people, in and between species. Language must be an open hand, not a checklist. The spiritual task is to unname the things around us, to unname the children so they can be themselves before us, to unname the beings that surround us. Le Guin, they seemed far closer than when their names had stood between myself and them like a clear barrier. So close that my fear of them and their fear of me became one same fear. And the attraction, the desire to smell one another's smells, etc. The spiritual task is to let go of categories, to let go the categories as often as possible in the effort to experience the unifying force in which fear and attraction are one. That unifying force in which the divine shows us, in which the divine slows us down to what matters, in which my words now must be as slow, as new, as single, as tentative as the steps I took going down the path away from the house. Between the dark branched, tall dancers, motionless against the winter shining.
Screen share. The music.
Yes. As we walk into this blessed morning, in the blessedness of rain, may we find our true center just for today, our humility and our curiosity. May we have the courage to face both our sorrows and our joys. May we walk in this God-given light, alert, and open as the hawk, gentle as the penguin, relaxed as the bear, in wonder and in grace. Amen.